There. There it is. I don't like Deadpool. I just thought I would get that out there right at the start. It's really not that great of a movie. Not awful, but not amazing either. So if you love Deadpool and were expecting me to gush over it as well, I won't do that. But that doesn't mean it's bad, and I don't want to offend anyone by this. I just thought you should all know beforehand. First of all, why do this? If people like this movie, then why should I talk about it this way at all? Simply put, I believe that nobody has really looked critically at Deadpool. One way or another, something got in the way of a fair analysis. Be it the fan buzz or the R-rated stigma, it doesn't matter. The effect is the same. I'm here to fill a void. I want to look at Deadpool critically. I want to weigh its good and bad points and decide fairly if it deserves the pedestal it has won amongst the pantheon of so-called good comic book movies. To save time, I will assume that you have watched the movie before watching this video. If you haven't, then I suggest you do, because what I say may color your opinion before you check it out, and I do think you should form your own opinion before looking at this video. First on the agenda is to dispel the myth that I hate every single second of the movie. That just isn't true. Despite what the title of this review may suggest, I don't hate this movie just because it was popular. The movie did quite a lot right, and in a lot of ways, Deadpool was a very innovative comic book film that has the potential to change the entire genre. It raised the bar in terms of faithfulness to a comic book character. When I heard that this movie was going to get made, I doubted that any major studio release could ever nail such an out-there niche character as Deadpool. But they did. For better or for worse, Ryan Reynolds is Deadpool. He proved that X-Men Origins Wolverine and Green Lantern were not his fault. Ryan Reynolds in this movie is clearly having the time of his life. He is just so happy to be playing a character he loves the way he wants to play him, and that enthusiasm is infectious. He carries the movie almost single-handedly. That may be because the rest of the cast is really weak, but still, this movie is the Deadpool show, and they at least got that part right. And Deadpool didn't shy away from the darker side of his character either. One upside of the R rating is that it can go places that few superhero movies have gone. I really enjoyed these darker moments of the film. For example, there is a great scene halfway through where, after being subjected to hideous experiments, Wade Wilson has a fight in a burning building. And halfway through the fight, he loses all of his clothes to the fire. And this scene has real emotional heft because his nudity isn't there to show off his body. It's there to visually represent that everything that Wade Wilson had in his old life is now gone. There's almost nothing left of who he was except for his life. No PG-13 superhero movie could have gone there, and this movie did. And I appreciate that. The action was also pretty great. All one action scenes. Despite the relatively small budget, a little bit less than half of what it cost to make X-Men Apocalypse, the action is pretty good. Not as good as Apocalypse, but hey, this movie didn't cost $180 million. Deadpool flipping around, kicking guys, shooting and slicing, it's all really impressive, it looks amazing. He had the physicality of a gymnast like Gazelle and Kingsman. Boy, I'd love to see a fight between those two. The fighting was great in this movie, I just wish there could have been more of it. Finally, I really enjoyed how much this movie expanded the X-Men universe. Before this, the X-Men movie universe had existed of ensemble action pieces running through the most famous X-Men storylines to varying degrees of success. They spoke about discrimination and such heavy topics with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. They had a rotating cast of characters centering around Magneto and Professor X, typically played by a British actor. I do enjoy these films, and I am a really hardcore X-Men fan, but it's really interesting to see some variation in the X-Men movie universe. It was just a story in the X-Men universe instead of an X-Men story. It opened the door for a lot of different new stories to be told in this universe. I couldn't be more excited for Gambit, Wolverine 3, X-Men The New Mutants, X-Force, Deadpool 2, and whatever other spin-offs are in the works. See? I don't hate everything about this movie. There were things that I like. What do you think of that, Xavier? Now that I have praised this movie for all the wonderful things it did right, it is time for me to tear it down for all the things it did wrong. It wasn't just one fatal sin that kept me from enjoying the movie. It was a cavalcade of errors, of things that just rubbed me the wrong way, one after another after another. No one thing stood out from the rest as particularly egregious, except for maybe one. And that is the horrible story structure and spastic editing. What do I mean by this? Well, the movie starts out with the opening credits, and they're all humorous and CG and what have you. And these opening credits take place in an action scene that is in the middle of the second act. Then it cuts to a scene that takes place right before then, after which the action scene during which the opening credits are set takes place. And within this action set piece, it cuts back to the first act before Wade Wilson was Deadpool. And then after that, the fight continues and repeat cutting back to the first act later and later. We have a little bit of the first act, action. Little bit of the first act, action. And it repeats cutting back and forth and back and forth. And after that action scene is finally done, we then cut back to the end of the first act, and then we fill in the gaps between the first and second acts, and then after that, they skip to the end of the second act, and we go forward from there. It's a little bit confusing. The reason why this annoyed me so much was that the already present tone disconnect between the first and second acts is exacerbated by this slapdash Man of Steel style storytelling. It's hard for me to get invested in a cancer drama when the same character is making masturbation jokes in the very next scene. Furthermore, it's hard to get invested in a guy making masturbation jokes when the very next scene he's talking about the effects of cancer on one's life in speeches ripped straight from The Fault in Our Stars.
The worst part about cancer isn't what it does to you, but what it does to the people you love. Who knew if this guy could save my life? But I knew there was only one way that I could save hers.
Gus, I'm a grenade. One day I'm gonna blow up, and I'm gonna obliterate everything in my wake, and I don't want to hurt you.
Tone is an important thing. It sets how a movie is perceived. If a movie is a comedy, then people allow it to venture into the realm of stereotypes and hyperbole. But that would not be allowed in a more serious drama. If a movie is a comic book movie, then people would accept that people have superpowers and they wear spangly outfits instead of more realistic portrayal, and they don't expect a serious discussion on the role a superhero plays and how that would realistically interact with the world. I think I'm getting why that movie bombed. And this movie has several different tones. It's a comic book movie, it's an R-rated comedy, it's a cancer drama, it's an action movie. But through and through and through, more than anything else, it is a superhero movie. Although all those vying, disconnecting tones, it confused me on how I should think about this movie, and that took me out of the experience, and I think it probably took some of you out too. Speaking of which, this is a really cliche superhero movie. For a movie that was touted as the epitome of newness, the turning point in comic book movies, it's really behind the times. It's basically a 2000 superhero movie with a lot of explicit jokes and a wink to the audience every now and then. Look, turning to us and acknowledging that what you're doing is stupid and unoriginal doesn't stop it from being stupid and unoriginal. The girlfriend is the one-note girlfriend who gets captured as bait for the hero like Mary Jane. The British villain is evil and British, basically Magneto without the depth or personal trauma, just the cheesy accent. The comic relief is also just the comic relief, like in every single movie ever made. It's supposed to be the golden age of superhero movies. Fan favorite characters are getting their own movies. we're finally getting two high-profile female-led superhero movies that might not be terrible. Older mainstays of superhero movies like Spider-Man are getting a second shot at some new vitality. But we're still stuck on these tired cliches, even in this. And the villain is a particularly sad point for me, because so many superhero movies fall into this trap. Deadpool, the movie, focused so hard on getting the main character right that they had little time for anything else. While he may be competently portrayed by Ed Skrein, who challenged his unlikability and slimy nature into a villainous role, it's just so underwritten. He's evil because he likes being evil. That's it. That's all you need. You're questioning this? Shut up and listen to Ryan Reynolds break the fourth wall! So, that's what I liked and I didn't like about this Deadpool movie. And I looked at it as a movie. I've never read the comic book, so I looked at it on its own. But there's a problem there, given that this movie is based off of one of the only comic books that seems to matter as a comic book instead of as an instructional booklet on how to make a comic book movie. To help me with that end of the equation, I have Xavier here to help me look at the movie from a comic book perspective. I hope that this will widen the discussion of this movie to understand where everybody is coming from when they look at this highly influential movie.
On the flip side of David's point of view, I am a massive fan of the Deadpool comics, and I've been reading the character since about the beginning of the Daniel Way run in 2008. I would say that I definitely adored the movie adaptation in spite of its flaws. I saw it 3 times in the theater, and David's footage in this review is from my DVD copy of it. Despite how much I enjoyed it, there are a lot of things that bug me as a fan of the character, and I'd be biased if I didn't at least address them. The biggest problem for me is that Wade Wilson's character has a much flatter arc throughout. The comics have always had this sickly undertone to them. It's fun and colorful on the outside, but there's something sad and demented hidden in the subtext of all great Deadpool stories. Deadpool's humor is spot on, but his opinions and values seem off, and he never goes anywhere in terms of character building like he does in the books. Comic Deadpool's constant struggle to go from villain to hero feels like this uphill battle, and we root for him to become something better than he is. A lot of people can identify with someone struggling with self-improvement as a person. In the film, Deadpool isn't quite as tormented, and just isn't quite as endearing because of it. He seemed a little too comfortable with his own personality and the people around him. The comics counterpart always struck me as someone who used comedy to hide his pain. He was all about hiding things, and for a long time he was even so ashamed of himself that removing his mask would put him into a violent rage. It took a lot of time to overcome that shame and let himself be seen by others. Becoming Deadpool was also no simple task for him in the original story either. The movie version even goes as far as to have his personality pretty much the same before and after Weapon X, meaning he didn't really seem affected by it in the long run. The death of his friend by Ajax's hand played a major role in forming his strange new sense of humor, which he had just recently developed. Prior appearances of Wade Wilson paint him as sort of sullen and serious, or at the very least, violent and disturbed. And the flip of his character was very interesting to see play out. The movie does a lot right in representing the humor and feel of the character, but the biggest problem is that things stay the same for him throughout his life, and maybe even get better. He starts as a badass mercenary dating a prostitute, and ends as a badass immortal mercenary with bad skin who's dating a very committed stripper. It felt a little too happy for him, especially considering most situations he's in make him feel as if though he can just never catch a break from life. If anything, you could make the argument that now he's happier than the way he started because he's a superhero version of the person he already was. The reason I think we should respect the movie, though, is not for its rock-solid character arc, but for the fact that it stood for something. Deadpool isn't by any means a kid-friendly character, and a small group of talented and passionate people with a low budget took a position where they wanted nothing more than to represent it as correctly as they were permitted. They put a lot of work into making it something for the fans, even when the studio had no faith in them. These people really stood out in a world where superhero movies are expected to cost hundreds of millions to bring to life. It was a movie made by the right people at the right time. And even though they had to mainstream the plot a little, it was still a great movie for doing something different from dark and sad or happy and kid-friendly. Sure, the story isn't exact and feels a little bit rushed, but that's why they have to adapt stories. It's hard to pack so much story into 2 hours, and I think they did the best with the time allotted, and I look forward to whatever they do next with the character. Back to you, Rick the Hipster.
You still like it? Despite all of that? Well, I still don't like it. And here's why. I appreciate the intent of a bunch of filmmakers trying to adapt a property they love as they think it should be portrayed. I applaud the artistic integrity and the ambition displayed by this creative team. Whenever something like this happens and it is successful, it should be applauded. Because we live in a movie-going society where the pressures of TV, online media, video games, and general apathy about Hollywood is significantly hurting the art of film. Movie studios are taking less risks every day, and rightfully so, because bomb after bomb after bomb happened where filmmakers tried to create something new and nobody went to see it. Any time when a risk like this pays off, it's a small miracle. But the wonder of this film's mere existence in today's filmmaking climate does not excuse its actual quality. Deadpool tried a bunch of new things, and a lot of them didn't work. It should be praised for trying, but criticized for what it did wrong. It's not perfect, and that's okay. Nothing is. I don't hate the film, I just don't enjoy it. There were elements, there were scenes that I liked, but the overall product was lackluster. But I do think that it blazed a trail for something new. Without films like Deadpool, the superhero genre would become another passing fad like the Western or the young adult movie. Love it or hate it, I believe that Deadpool will prove to be a positive influence on the superhero genre. Well, I'm David. Thank you for watching. Comment below on how you think I should be tortured for disagreeing with your opinion. And I'll see you in the next video.